by basically prefacing the question with you say Quebec doesn't deal with racism, and then saying you support discriminatory laws. It's very easy to then associate both. So basically, by asking that question, you're saying Quebec is racist because of Bill 21. Like that's how some people will interpret it, right? Obviously, like a lot of people still believe that Bill 21 is this discriminatory law. Even one of the judges in Quebec believes it's a discriminatory law as well. But the way that question was phrased, it kind of narrowed the scope of the answer Yves-François Blanchet could give. And Yves-François Blanchet's response to that was that, your question seems to imply the response that you want, right? And that's kind of how I also saw it. I always believe, like, in terms of moderator, let's say, practices and debates, my favorite thing about moderators is when they follow up. Because on debates, politicians always like to sidestep questions. They always like to not really answer the question. So I always love when moderators go, but the question was, I like when they do that, it really gets to reframe the conversation to what the initial point was. But in terms of that question itself, I think there was a lot of space for her to make that question much more objective. At least the initial question, you could make it much more objective and then move on to, et cetera. We saw with Trump. Remember Trump and Megyn Kelly? Megyn Kelly was like, you called women, this, that, the other, whatever. These are facts. She's just saying facts, not saying, oh, you believe women are this, that, because and then you called them this, that. No, it said you call women this, and that. Facts. Obviously, Trump answers back. He's like, only Rosie O'Donnell or whatever. But still, you see, when you're asking questions that, and everybody has their own biases towards them, but when you ask a question that's so polarizing as this, and you have facts behind you, I would say use as much facts as you can instead of kind of framing a position to that question. That's kind of how I saw it. But obviously afterwards, you saw how it blew up. You have the premier of Quebec chiming in, saying like the fact that she would imply Quebec is racist is nonsense, etc. You see Trudeau and Erin O'Toole. This was, for me, is a nail in the coffin for that question. When Erin O'Toole and Justin Trudeau, who obviously want Quebec votes as much as possible, when they both come out after the debate saying, oh, we disagree with that question, and etc. And then I think Yves-François Blanchet later talked about, he said, these guys are too late. They're on the debate stage. They didn't want to defend Quebec. Now they want to defend Quebec. Once that happens, it's a tough situation for the debate commission.
Yeah. Well, like for me, I think this was made a bigger issue, and it reflects a bigger issue than it is, and it reflects something that like an interesting dynamic in this specific election. So to go back on the question, so the question was something like, you claim that there's no systemic racism in Quebec, but you support the law 21 and the other one, I forgot which one it is. But basically, I think the question could have been better framed. The moderator could have said, you claim that there's no systemic racism in Quebec, but these laws have been called, discriminatory by this judge, by these people, including Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau in 2019 said that those laws were discriminatory. So like if the question was put in that sense, like either Yves-François Blanchet could have decided to either defend, both those claims and say, no, these laws aren't discriminatory and there's no systemic racism in Quebec. Like that could have been an answer, and like that could have been a position that he could have taken. But the fact that the moderator said that those laws were, it's not a disputed fact that those laws are, discriminatory. That's where, there is, I think the question wasn't best phrased. But I think, first of all, I think those laws are discriminatory. I think there's systemic racism in Quebec, and a lot of it. And if I'm being honest, I think I'm going to choose my words. I think there's a lot more racism in Quebec than in many parts of Canada. Like this is from personal experience. I lived in Quebec for some time. I went to the University of Ottawa. Quebec is right nearby, and my close friend, my family members have been, like they've had racist incidents. Like a close person. I don't just want to identify this person, but a person that I know went with a friend to a restaurant, like not like McDonald's, like a restaurant in downtown Montreal. And then they basically they asked for food, they ordered, and the server came, because those people were black, they asked them to pay for the food before getting the food, in downtown Montreal, like in a restaurant, and this
That's
is one of many stories, like,
mm-hmm.
so obviously when there's racism in the society, we need to admit it and work towards, like, like eradicating it, but we can't just, say there's no racism and whatever. So and this is not Quebec bashing, because there's been like people are, when every time you criticize Quebec, Quebecois and Quebecois will be like, oh, this is Quebec bashing. I don't think it is. Like if Alberta did something bad, like I'll also say that, and but I think, but this reflects an interesting dynamic in this election, because like it's a tight race, and the mainstream parties cannot afford to lose votes in Quebec. Like the Liberals are really threatened by the Bloc Québécois and the NDP and the other parties. The same thing for the Conservatives, and the Bloc, well, claims to be the party that looks for Quebecois interests. So there's a lot of competition. It's a tight race. Like these bills, these laws aren't new. They were there in 2019. And like in 2019, the position of, say, Justin Trudeau was that these laws are discriminatory against minorities, but I'll let the courts deal with them. He couldn't. I don't think he committed to interfering or not. He said he'll just let it to the court and see what happens. Jagmeet Singh also said that those laws were discriminatory in 2019, but he didn't say whether he would do something if he were elected prime minister. So those were the positions of those parties. But you go, you come to like 2 years after, they're backtracking. Like Justin Trudeau is saying like that question is unfair because like because it says that those laws were discriminatory. He said that in 2019. So I think it's not about the fairness of the question per se. I think it's more so about like the race, like he knows like he can't afford to lose votes, so he's just like pandering to Quebec. So, and that's the most unfortunate thing in this race, in this election. It's just like nobody has been critical when it comes to issues regarding Quebec. Like we have to think about like the issues surrounding Quebec identity, Quebec nationalism. We have to talk about them. We can't just like it's not ideal when everybody's just scared to talk about them. Like everybody's not trying to touch those issues, and I don't think it's ideal, but it also reflects the fact that this is a really, really tight race.
Yeah, because when that happens, and you don't really get honest answers to the questions. And not only that, I think in a way the aftermath of this does like more disservice to the people fighting against Bill 21, against those discriminatory laws, and also the people that are most affected by these laws, which is mainly Muslim women, because they're the one that were the hijab. Their religion expression is more pronounced than any other religion. So they're the ones that get turned down for jobs, etc., and lose opportunities of advancement because of those laws. So in a wider conversation, when it comes to Bill 21, due to the aftermath of that question, I think it's a real disservice to those advocates that are fighting, against that law, because now the conversation now becomes people saying Quebec isn't racist rather than just looking at Bill 21 itself and then judging Bill 21 based on, on its merits and etc. And it's interesting because I never heard the word Quebec bashing until this election. And the face of Quebec bashing, from just what I've seen from TV, is Jagmeet Singh. Like that, they've made Jagmeet Singh the face of Quebec bashing. Every time they keep saying Jagmeet Singh said this about Quebec, said this about Quebec, and that. And I think the reason for that being obviously is that Jagmeet Singh runs the most progressive party in Canada. He's the guy that will call out any instances of racism. He did it in the House with it was a Black MP, right? When that waved Jagmeet Singh off, when Jagmeet Singh was talking about the racism and they were trying to get a vote of I don't know, I forgot what was the exact context, but I remember that guy waved Jagmeet Singh off, and then Jagmeet Singh went at the guy afterwards, and that became an issue. And Yves François was asked again about racism in Quebec when the I think the APTN news journalist came on and asked that question about Quebec, and he was saying how I previously had admitted that systematic racism does exist. He said, like, I previously admitted that, but then once I said that, then that was used against me. It was used as an opportunity, to attack me and etc. So I would rather address systematic racism in a more quiet setting, which for me was such a weird answer. I was just like, what's that even mean? I don't know if you saw that part. I was just like, that's a very very weird answer. But moving on to other moments and debates that were interesting. Yeah, so you're starting to see
just a second. Let me just
go ahead.
A final word on this. Like on Yves François Blanchet, he said, I believe in the English debate, and he's not really like, that's not his first language. So like, it's better to consider his remarks in French. But nevertheless, this was also addressed in the English debate. Well, he said something like, I didn't want to say whether there is or there isn't systemic racism because the word systemic racism is being used to bash Quebec, so, it's kind of like going back to, those, wishy-washy positions, like, if there is racism, just say there is, if there isn't, say there isn't, but don't be like, oh, I don't want to say this because it's going to get used to, especially if it's an important issue such as racism, given what Canada has been going through in the past year, given what the world has been going through, this is something that infuriates me because, like, when you find unmarked graves of Indigenous children, like, you'll see these leaders be the first ones to, to express sorrow and whatnot. But when it's time to not even act, just say things clearly, they fade in the darkness, so, like, that was really, this is one of the few worst moments for me in this election. And I'd like to give a shout out to Annemie Paul, because she actually told Yves François Blanchet that if you don't think there is systemic racism in Quebec, I'd like to I'd like to educate you, and it's not to insult you, it's to actually educate you, because as a Black woman who lives in Canada, who's Francophone and has family across Canada, I know that there is, so